here today doing one of those TED Talks on power poses. Don't stand like that, stand like that and be strong. Or on the ocean's economy and how we can save it, Lewis Pugh style. Because I think that those are so much easier to do than the topic I have been asked to do it to here today. Don't shake your head, lady. Which is media ethics. Because sometimes I think that media and ethics goes together like blackouts and the weather. And since it's a Josie morning, I thought it also goes together like reliable and electricity. Or Rocksteady and a Majuba Sido. And then my horrible one, like working and traffic lights this morning. So it's a contested topic, this media ethics. But certainly I think in 20 years of freedom, there's no assessment I've seen which doesn't state the media as an important institution of society, of freedom, and of democracy. I don't add a word of whether it regards it as good or bad, but I would like to say that in either way, we certainly do make an impact. So look how much time we've spent this year speaking about that house. A lot of time. And I've wondered to myself why it is that why this story when so much more is misspent? Why is it this story that seems to have built an awareness of corruption in our hearts, our souls, in our countries, across our radio waves and on our broadcast channels? And I do think it's because the misspending happened on one person. It was very visible and we knew the exact amount. And that amount is 246 million. Now that's a lot of money because it's 246 and 6 zeros. I said 9, but my colleagues pointed out to me, no, room of actuaries, don't say that, 6 zeros. It's a lot of money. And it went on things like this. So this is also from the Public Protector's report. But we know the details of a chicken run, of a cattle culvert, of a fire pool, swimming pool, that one, a visitor center amphitheater, and a clinic that actually is not open to the people of Nkanda or Pamalala village. And I think this is why it's caught a spark in South Africa's, in our body politic, in how we talk, why it's caught a flame in our society. And here's another reason. I think it's caught a flame because this brilliant woman, the face of ethical governance in South Africa, has not allowed it to go away. She produced this report, Secure in Comfort. It's a very long read, but I think if you want to understand what's happened to us, why we went from Madiba's bar of soap to today, do read and have a look at this report. It really will help you to understand that. She found in there that the president had unduly benefited from Nkandla. And that's the debate we sit with now. I think our biggest ethical debate in South Africa at the moment is, did the president benefit unduly or did he not? And I think we're going to spend the rest of 2014 and possibly all of 2015 speaking about this. So she's maintained her position despite extreme political pressure. And that political pressure doesn't only come from being bad-mouthed on 1,000 platforms by politicians, but also by Parliament trying to tighten the noose, the financial noose around her neck. You'd have noticed in the past couple of weeks, she's been told that she will not have an increase in her budget, although the public is filling her in tray so much that she does need several hundred million more. I wish we could start crowdfunding to ensure that we keep the ethical standard in our country. So these days at City Press, I must admit to you, and I find it an ethical gap, we make decisions on what we will cover in corruption by the OMG factor. So it has to stimulate a response in our readers or even our colleagues as we test stories like, oh shit, that's a big one. And I must tell you that the figure is getting bigger and bigger. It's like the snowfall we showed you there. So this is from the past weekend City Press. It's about how a 98 million rand tender for a building, the refurbishment of the building in Gauteng, was won in 24 hours. And what we tried to do there was show how every single ethical misstep that was made is in the graphic. How quickly it took, how they lacked expertise, how it had been filled in pencil, the tender forms. And this is what we find we have to do these days in order not to generate an immune response in our readers. So I'll admit to this. Sometimes people will send me emails, send us emails, phone us, try and pass on information, and not all of it gets into print at all. In fact, I'd say most of it doesn't. I think I tell you that because I do consider it an ethical breach as an editor that we can't investigate every single thing. But I think our immune level, the levels of impunity in our society are growing so much that I've certainly watched us increase that. We decided not to cover it. So at every gathering of the media, and if we had time for questions, I'm sure I'd hear it here too, say, but what about private sector corruption? And I do think that that is a whole talk for another day. Do we do it well? Do we do it fairly? I'm not sure. But I'll admit to a bias. I am very interested in public sector corruption because it has a massive, massive impact on development. And maybe I can email this graphic or have it put up later. But what it shows you is what we could be spending money on. So we took the Auditor General's latest figures of misspending or loss, 24.8 billion. I think it was at local government level. And we worked out some things. So with that money, there we go, we could pay the presidential salary for 9,000 years. We could provide spousal support for the president's wives for more than 1,500 years. But here's the big stuff. We could educate 2.5 million public school pupils. We could build 24 new children's hospitals, including just build that Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital that's struggling so. Pay for 1.2 million university student places, and given the numbers of protests we've seen with water and sanitation, we could fund the entire water and sanitation infrastructure budget for 1 year on what we tend to waste at local government level every single month. So that's why I spend more time talking about public sector corruption than private sector. I also wanted to take you through 5 things that I think we know about because of a robust free media, and then 5 things we don't know enough about because we're not robust and ethical enough. So the first one is the arms deal. I think if it hadn't been for media exposés and the important work of people like Pat DeLille, like Andrew Feinstein, Terry Crawford Brown, I don't think we'd have begun to detail the loss of our innocence. We also wouldn't know about the role of middlemen in corruption. I use Shabir Sheikh there because he's the most public middleman in our many stories of corruption. It came to court, we know exactly how these systems work. Here's one that I feel hasn't caught a flame enough. City Press has been covering for ages now the fact that teaching posts in public schools are being sold to the highest bidder, and they are always SATU members. That impacts directly on the quality of education that our children get. The fourth thing we know, the construction cartel. I'm a very big fan of our stadiums, although I know not everyone is. They're beautiful, but we paid way too much for them, as we now know from the exposés around the construction cartel. And then the worst cartel that's exposed in recent years, the price of bread, mostly to poor people. So the things we don't know enough of. I still think our bank charges are way too high. I don't know why we pay for our accounts. Many countries don't. And here's one that I suspect may get me a few tomatoes. Vuyani and Galwana pension funds adjudicator. I do think that we haven't continued the important watchdog role of assessing why our retirement fund fees are quite as high as they are. In fact, all investment fund fees. The third thing we don't talk about enough is our Gini coefficient, or the wealth gap. I think that is still pretty much a picture of how we are today. Alex and Stanton, you can do Diepsloot and Dainfern, you can do Lewandle and Landudno. I do think if we don't begin to close that wealth gap, it's going to catch up with us. And I think we can see it in the fact that we've got almost 3 protests happening somewhere in South Africa every day. The fourth thing we don't speak about enough, I think, is our levels of poverty, especially child poverty. And then the fifth, allied to that, is I don't think we give credit where credit is due enough, that 18 million people on a social grant is in fact a wonderful, wonderful achievement of 20 years of democracy. I think we too often cover it as a story of dependency, when what it has been is a wonderful achievement to keep the wolf from the door of so many of our citizens. Is it sustainable? That's for poor Mr. Nhlanhla Nene to decide and tell us by February next year. What you don't want to do as a journalist, though, and we're very careful about this, is to trigger an immune response where people just say, in fact, many people tell me, and don't tell me if this is true because it will make me very sad, we just don't read the news anymore. You really have to watch for that. And the reason you have to is that I think we have a duty not to show our country as gangster's paradise. So do dance with me a little. Thanks, Oliver. Sometimes we are a bit of a gangster's paradise, but we have to ensure that we don't make that the only story. And getting this right is also, I consider, to be part of my ethical practice. You have to give a fair view of your country so that you stimulate a happy response in people. And how do we do so? I think we have to set the narrative that our country perhaps has not got the government of the fairest, best stripe at the moment, but really it is a very, very cool country. And if you doubt it, consider that image there. That's Claire Danes. She was recently here filming Homeland. I think she was in Kailicha or Crossroads that day. And then here, we can play that.
The tyranny of keeping them.
People must know the truth.
You're part of an important story. I want to be the one to tell it.
That's the current series of Homeland. I'm sure most of you watch it. And that was Lower Woodstock doing a fairly good impersonation of Lower Lahore in Pakistan. So very much, Cape Town has become a node on our global entertainment landscape. So look there, that's Sean Penn and Charlize Theron on Long Street, real shot. Although I hear they had a fight in a restaurant on the Channel 24 Junkie. And that there, you may not be able to see, but it is Penny Cruz and Javier Bardem. I think I've been working in tabloids for too long, but they were taking their kids to the Greenpoint Stadium. No? So very much these have become everyday things. I think we don't appreciate enough how much we've become this country that's very well known around the world, not only for Shrin Diwani or Oscar Pistorius, but in wonderful and very positive ways as well. So insofar as we've opened up our land and our hearts, I think we are a people who go Mikasa, Sukasa. So I couldn't resist that one. That doesn't get you. So it's Mikasa, Mafikizolo. You can name them, our artists and our filmmakers and our authors, Lauren Bucas, they are clocking up awards like you cannot believe. Makes you very, very proud, creates a balanced picture, which I think is a part of solving the ethical dilemma. Here's another person who poses for our country, I think, a huge ethical dilemma. Certainly does for me.
The question we're asking today, and we're not going to leave here before we get an answer, is when are you paying the money?
So he's possibly going to be my person of 2014, newsmaker, agreed? Maybe not. I think he's been the political phenomenon of the year with the economic freedom fighters. So they got maybe 9%. I think if we were to hold an election, how much? 6, thank you. I think if we were to hold an election today, it would go up to 12, maybe. I think they would easily double what they got because they've really assumed the mantle of official opposition, even though they're much smaller than the Democratic Alliance. I think Pay Back the Money was brilliant because it tapped into a political sentiment and became an absolute meme. The ANC now pegs itself on that. Last week, Matole Motshekga, one of the chief whips, saying in Parliament, No, President doesn't have to pay back the money. Didn't realize he was using the phrase. But in deifying Juju, this is the ethical question that we ask in our newsroom, or try to ask. I don't do it with great success. In deifying him, in creating this hero, do we forget about this personality? Remember that guy? Okay. That was Blinkster Julius in Mauritius at the wedding of a Limpopo entrepreneur. I think we forget that now that he's recast himself as a revolutionary oppositional figure, that actually was at the heart of a corrupt system, so corrupt that it made Limpopo bankrupt. And I think this is the story of South Africa. We can create heroes maybe a little too quickly without making the ethical inspection that is so very, very important. My talk here is to tell you that there's always, or try to show that there's always two ways of looking at everything. From our favorite politicians to our not so favorite ones, and mostly to our country. So if I can end on three things, I think, because people often feel angry or disappointed. This morning, driving here and watching the lights, I thought, are we at the beginning or the end of the decline of our working state? Are we going to get electricity supply right, or must I go buy that horrible generator? I certainly hope we do get it right. But three things that I try and live by. It has to be tweet plus. Tweeting is not activism. It really doesn't do anything. It goes into the ether. It can create a trend, but it's not enough. The second thing I would say is let's become part of our ward committees where we live. Because if we can start making where we live good, then maybe we can make our nation great again. And then mostly, join a movement. So many inspiring people here today. We have a whole new politics in South Africa that's run way outside of political parties. You can join a women's movement, a health movement. You can join a movement for fathers, as we'll hear from our next speaker. I think that we're an activist country, and that ultimately will be our saving grace, what will take us into the next 20 years of freedom successfully. But I do believe that it rests with us doing more than only complaining. Thank you so much for listening.